Hey, welcome to episode number 7 of the Go-To Physio podcast. In today's episode, I talk about the terminal knee extension exercise and discuss if this is a good idea or is there a better exercise alternative that we can maybe work a little bit smarter and not so hard. I hope you enjoy the show. Hey, welcome to episode 7 of the Go-To Physio podcast. My name is Dave O'Sullivan and you're very welcome to another episode. Now, we're going to switch again from kind of the higher level thinking. On the last show, we talked about how to design a treatment plan, especially after the initial assessment. What I want to do now is get back into the day-to-day grind, so to speak, and help you apply the information that we're talking about in this podcast clinically. Okay? If you know anything about me now, everything we teach, we want it to be able to be applied and implemented with real people in the real world, and not what this podcast is all about. Now, today's episode, I want to talk about the terminal knee extension exercise, and maybe just have a discussion or a conversation about if this is a good idea, if this is a good exercise. And the terminal knee extension, obviously, if you're not familiar with it, which I think most people are. A lot of people use it for ACLs. A lot of people use it post-surgery, and to fire up the quad, so to speak. Okay, and it's an exercise which I'm not a particular big fan of. I think there's better ways to modify this exercise to get a whole host more benefits than just doing that exercise in that particular way. And hopefully by the end of this episode, you may have a different or slight modification of that exercise that's going to get a lot more benefits than just doing it the way it's currently being done. So the way it's being done, an athlete or a patient gets a band, they tie it to a squat rack or whatever. They put their full limb in between the band, and then they essentially snap their knee back and extend their knee, so to speak. Okay, and that's not a great movement for me. And in fact, the actual knee driving, going into extension, that's actually a particular movement that the terminal knee extensions is doing, that exercise is doing. That's actually a movement that I spend the vast majority of my time trying to stop or avoid being implemented in the vast majority of my patients. And I think that particular movement, it's something that you'll see clinically in a lot of patients, not all patients obviously, but some patients. And my first exposure to this, especially a lot of there was a couple of Islanders when I worked at Leeds Rhinos, and they were notorious for this, where they kind of, as you walk, you see the knee snap back. And I've just come back from holiday, and I was in the airport yesterday, and I saw the exact same thing happening with a guy. And my first instinct was to go and try video, but I didn't bother. So again, as that foot hits the floor, you see the knee snapping back. Now, in more in an athlete population, we'll also see it as athletes are accelerating. Okay, and that's not a great thing for me. I've done other blogs on this, and again, if you haven't already listened to, I would really recommend listening to episode 3, which talks about, it was called "The Glutes Only as Good as the Hamstring and Gastro Allows It to Be." So hopefully by now you appreciate my stance on this and where I'm coming from, and that will be a very, very good episode to listen to before this episode, so you'll have a better kind of foundation. But we will recap the main points from that episode today, but for more in-depth explanation, then I would encourage you to go to episode 3 of the Go-To Physio podcast. So pretty much the terminal knee extension, the issue with that is in gait, when that happens, when that knee snaps back prematurely, is we're getting a passive hip extension. Okay, we're getting a passive hip extension, we're getting very little intent happening at the foot. Okay, so if the knee's coming back too quickly as that person's walking, then what I would interpret that to be is that the hamstring, the distal hamstring proximal gastro, aren't co-contracting with the knee and delaying knee extension so the hip can do work. And ultimately what we're doing is we're doing a lot of work at the knee. So when the knee comes back, obviously we're doing work, which is fine. And again, that's the big thing. Well, I don't think presumably, but I think that's the big thing. That's why this exercise is being designed and why people are doing it, is the knee's doing a lot of work. The problem with that is that when we snap the knee back, the quads are obviously doing a lot of work concentrically, but we're getting passive hip extension. Okay, so the glutes then are at end range. They're at a very big disadvantage in terms of length-tension relationship to do any work. Okay, so the glutes essentially are passive. And again, when you look in the physio world, etc., there's this big thing about, we need the glutes to be strong, etc. Whereas what I've covered in episode 3 was, in order for the glutes to do work, the big thing that we need to happen and for the glutes to be able to do active work is for the hamstring, the distal hamstring, the proximal gastro to delay knee extension so the hip joint can actually do work. Then the knee joint can do work. Okay, so again, don't, mistake, I've got nothing against knee extension, but I want knee extension to happen after hip extension is initiated. Okay, so again, if you're walking, you can achieve hip extension by snapping the knee back, or you can actually achieve hip extension by delaying knee extension, having genuine hip extension, and then as that hip passes over the foot, then we'll get that knee extension. Okay, and again, that's just gait. That's, if you want to look at stuff like Olympic lifting and stuff like that, I'm a big fan of looking at that in terms of speed and movement and what's happening. Some of those guys are very strong and powerful, and their nervous system self-organized in a way in order to get that weight from the floor up above their heads, and some of them, they're lifting, monumental weights compared to their body weight. The same in gait. If we look at gait, as that foot hits the floor, okay, again, the weight's on the heel. As the hip pushes over the midfoot, so to speak, the weight goes onto the midfoot, and then as our center of gravity passes over our base of support, the weight goes onto the toes. Okay, what you get with terminal knee extension is you get the hip inflection, so to speak, and then the knee is just being driven into extension while the hip is ultimately in flexion. Okay, so from a coordination point of view, which is what I think is critical, okay, I don't see a massive carryover in terms of everything working well together. I still think we can get all the benefits of the knee extension, but I think we can get it in a much more smarter way. Now, the way that I prefer to get it, okay, is I prefer to actually have the setup pretty much the same setup as the terminal knee extension exercise. But what I want to happen is I want that person to step over their foot, get their center of gravity over their base of support, but I want massive intent happening through the plantar flexors. Okay, so I want good plantar flexion. Okay, I want active hip extension, and I want knee extension then to happen. Okay, so I want to coordinate this, and I think neurologically this is very, very important that we get that good plantar flexion, we get active hip extension, and then we get knee extension. Whereas I think what's happening here with the knee extension exercises, I think, yeah, we're getting the knee joint to do work, but I'm just very skeptical of the carryover to this in the real world. Okay, and if anything, I think it's you're almost training a movement pattern or cycle or whatever you want to call it that's suboptimal for energy efficiency. Okay, so what I want is when that foot hits the floor is I want, the gastro, the hamstring, the quads, and the glutes to do 25% each, give or take. Okay, I don't want the quads to be doing the vast majority of the work. Okay, if the quads are doing a whole lot of work, let's say, for instance, instead of doing 25% of the work, give or take, they're doing 75%, then is it any wonder that the patella tendon and the anterior knee joints getting a bit grumbly? Okay, what I'd rather is everything does its job. We have movement variability. We distribute that load well throughout the body rather than one joint taking excessive load. Hey, I hope you're enjoying today's show. For more clinical content and tips to help you implement this content in the real world, please visit thegotophysio.com for more information, including my 6-step patient adherence checklist, which you can download for free. And also there's more blog content that helps you implement this stuff in the real world. You'll also find links to my YouTube show, the Go-To Physio Show, as well as lots of more information to help you become the go-to therapist, helping real patients get real results in the real world. So the exercise that I've done a video with Shane, I would encourage you to go over to www.thegotophysio.com/blog, and you'll see that exercise, terminal knee extension exercises. You'll see an alternative to that. And even Shane doesn't do a great job of it initially. Okay, and what we want is we don't want him to be thinking about knee extending. We want the knee extension to happen through intention of the foot, because that's what happens in real life. When I want to get from point A to point B, I move, the intent a lot of the time is happening through my foot. Okay, I push into the floor to get a reaction to get myself from point A to point B. So the intention needs to happen through the floor. When we get that good intent through the floor, we're going to get the gastro, we're going to get proximal gastrodistal hamstring to work, delay knee extension, we're going to get active hip extension, and then we'll get all the good stuff that happens with the terminal knee extension exercise. Okay, the exercise I've shown you in the blog, I have quite a few progressions for that I've used, and again I've used with an ACL guy, one of the clubs I was consulting with last year, and the scenario with him, actually sorry, it was this year, he's got back from a second ACL, and we'd done a great job with his hamstrings, and they were really, really strong. And what was happening was towards the end of the session, so his calves were getting quite tight. So we actually done too good a job with his calf and hamstrings, and we actually needed to do get a little bit more integration through his quads. So what we did then was we put him into the scenario, the setup that I show you in the blog, and then we made that a lot more dynamic and active, and he was exploding up onto boxes from that initial position that I show you in the blog. So the blog, that's a great starting point for patients, and then as you get to higher level rehab progressions, you can really build and progress this exercise. Whereas if you do a terminal knee extension exercise, there's nowhere really to go with that exercise. Okay, whereas once we integrate everything, all we're doing is we're training movement, we're helping the brain coordinate, fire tissues, the timing, the sequencing, the activation, allowing muscles to relax at certain points. That's all very, very important. Okay, and again, one of the big things that has to happen with terminal knee extension, okay, is the quads need to relax. Okay, so again, we want to ensure that we're training the ability of the quads to activate, but also to relax. We want the glute to activate, relax when we need it to. We want the hamstrings to activate, to relax when we need it to. Okay, so again, muscle activation, it's not just about muscle activation, it's about other tissues, training the ability of these tissues to relax. Okay, so again, it's an exercise that I think I can understand why people are trying to get the quad to work. But again, my thing was, well, can we just work a little bit smarter and not harder? Can we integrate an exercise that couples knee extension with active plantar flexion and active hip extension? Okay. When you do that, neurologically, I think that the brain appreciates that, and I think you're much more likely to get more long-lasting changes in the extension. But not only that, is you'll still fire the quads, but you're firing them in sequencing and timings that are more transferable, in my opinion, to activities such as gait and such as high-level accelerations and stuff like that. So again, if you want to know more about that, then I'd definitely recommend going back to episode 3, where I talk a lot about that. The glute is only as good as the hamstring and gastric allows it to be. So what I would suggest is go over to thegotophysio.com/blog and make sure you check out that video where I show you exactly the modification. So again, the setup's the same as you would, but instead of snap the knee back, we're actually going to push into the floor with good intent with plantar flexion. We're going to step through, and then you're going to get active hip extension, and then we're going to make sure we keep that intent through the midfoot. And as that foot starts to plantar flex, you're going to see a natural reaction of knee extension, where the quad will still do work, but it's doing work with a plantar flexion and an active hip extension. Okay, so as I said, That's one way. If I want to go after the quads and I want the quads to work well, that's not my first choice exercise. This is just a modification and exercise that I want to do a blog on today. If I want to get a lot more quads and I want to get some good work and some overload through them, then I think there's much better ways to do that, which again, I go into a lot more detail on that in my Go-To Therapist mentorship, where we break all this down and we show you how to take that patient from that initial assessment or from day one post-op right through to the higher level rehab. Okay, so that's it for today. Hopefully you found this useful. As I said, obviously this is a podcast, so I think sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. So please go over to thegotophysio.com/blog and you'll see the video there where I've made especially to accompany this blog, or it'll be on my YouTube page or our Facebook page as well. That's it for today. Thanks for your attention. Again, I appreciate this is a slightly different way of looking at the body to the way we were taught in university. And, as I said, it's not the only way to get results, but it's a way that's been very, very successful for myself. And I appreciate your open-mindedness and your ability to try these things before you shut them down. Okay, so that's it. I will see you in the next episode, where I'm going to talk a very important episode where I talk about the importance of diaphragm and ribcage mobility for low back, groin and hip pain patients in particular. But in reality, this ribcage mobility and diaphragm mobility is very important for shin splints and a whole host of issues, Achilles, etc. as well. So make sure you tune in next week for episode 8 of the Go-To Physio podcast. If you haven't done so already, head over to the gotophysio.com website and pick up my 6-step checklist for complete patient adherence, which is very important, obviously, to get you to give you the best shot at helping that patient get long-lasting results, which will help then obviously your retention of those people having the confidence to come back to you, more referrals because they'll have confidence that you can help their friends and family, and obviously then the reputation as the go-to therapist in your town. Okay, so that's it for this week. I'll see you next week with another very important clinical application episode. And as I said, I appreciate your attention and I hope you enjoyed the show. Hey, I hope you enjoyed today's show. For more information, please visit www.thegotophysio.com, where you can download my 6-step patient adherence checklist absolutely free, as well as read the accompanying blog that goes with today's episode. We've got lots of cheat sheets and clinical content to help you implement to get real world results with real patients that ultimately helps you become the go-to therapist and allows you to build a profitable, busy private practice or become that go-to therapist in professional sport. I'll speak to you soon on the next episode.